webinar. I hope you're going to enjoy it. I am recording the webinar, so if you don't get a chance to pick up everything that we're going to cover this evening, you'll have a chance to have a look at the recording. We are waiting for other people to join us, so they're obviously delayed, but I want to get started on time, so we'll do that. I'm David O'Halloran, so I hope you can hear me okay. You found the chat box. We'll use the chat box for you to communicate with me. Although if it remains only with the three of you, then if you've got a microphone, I could unmute your microphone and you could talk to me. But we'll see how that plays out as we go on. So you've done the hard thing, which was registering for the webinar and getting on and logging on and things like this. So I hope that was a seamless experience for you. And what I wanted to do this evening really is just give you a little bit of an idea of what a webinar is like, and to see whether you've experienced one or not, and whether you like it, and whether this might be something that's suitable for you going further on as well, and maybe your colleagues as well. I'm told reliably from my teenage son that these are my handles for Facebook and Twitter. So if you are into Facebook, if you are into Twitter, it would be great to link up with you and maybe even hear a couple of messages from you about how the webinar's gone, really. So feel free to do that, and feel free to hook up with me on there. This is what we're going to cover in the next hour or so. Just want to tell you a tiny little bit about myself, because you're new to me and you're new to the stuff that I do in the main. So why should you trust the things that I'm saying? Well, I'll tell you for why in a little while, and I'll give you a bit of an idea of my background as well. But then we'll get into the meat of the presentation, which is really just giving you a little bit of information about what cancer is, with a bit of terminology thrown in there, and a bit of a sense of what we can do about cancer as well, in terms of where we go in terms of treatments and things like this. I'll let you have a little look at some of the webinars, other webinars that I do also, so you get an idea and a feel for the types of information that we cover within the webinars. And if you're interested in booking further, I'll show you how to do that as well as we go on. Plenty of time to ask questions if you want to do. Just simply type them in the chat box. You'll also see a hand icon, so if you raise the hand icon, it lets me know that you want to ask a question. I can either unmute your microphone, or you can just simply type the question in the chat box. It's as simple as that. So what I wanted to do first of all is give you an idea of the interactions that we can do with this type of webinar. So I'm going to give you a little bit of a couple of questions are going to come onto the screen now. Answer them. It's as simple as that. Right stuff. Well, we're split straight down the middle with just the four of us on at the moment. Obviously, if we had more people here who'd registered, we might get a different idea of whether people have been on webinars more frequently than others. But some of you have, some of you haven't. So certainly for those that haven't, it's a really good example of what webinars can do, and the power of them in terms of learning. Personally, I'm getting very used to doing webinars. I still do a lot of face-to-face, and face-to-face is really good, but it's not always suitable for all of us, because we can't always get to training courses elsewhere. Let's try another one. Let's try another one. What would be interesting to see where you're from? But I'm guessing I know the answer to that. You're all from the UK, but tell me if I'm wrong. Yeah. See, the shame of it was we had people register who was in America and Ethiopia, but they've obviously not been able to join us tonight. So you've got me all to yourself. So that's brilliant. Sorry. One other question. What I'd really like to do is ask you a question about cancer. because the meat of what we're going to talk about today is about that. But where do we stand on it? What do we think in terms of who it is who's going to get cancer, who's coming through our door mainly with this disease? Do we know? Very interesting answers. All right, let me share with what we've put there. Very interesting. All age groups in equal measure, with one person saying older generations. We'll say a little bit more about that in a minute, because I'll give you the answer to that as we go on. But let's get on to a little bit of this, and I'll say a little bit more about that age groups in a minute. Talking about age, that's me when I was a lot younger. For those, a lot more hair than what I have now. I trained as a therapy radiographer many years ago, but I've been teaching about cancer and cancer-related subjects now for over 25, nearly 30 years. And in 2002, I finished at the University of Leeds. But since then, I've been mainly going around the UK, talking to people about cancer and trying to bring this information across to people that don't necessarily have a background in cancer, and that's what I try to do. There's an awful lot of people who work in the cancer field, yourselves might be one of them, who have come into the profession that you are without any real background or training in cancer, maybe not even science, but then all of a sudden you're expected to understand, read this complex information and make sense of it. Personally, I think that's a little bit unfair to expect you to do that, so you need a little bit of help to be able to take forward this information and go forward running into the roles that you are. So I was really pleased when Rebecca sent me this testimonial and allowed me to use it, because that sums up exactly what I try to do, is to bring this complex information across in a way that people can understand. So that's what we're going to try to do this evening, and bring it across in a way that hopefully is palatable to you and allows you to take some stuff away to help you move on in your learning, really. What you might have also seen when you logged in is you were able to print the presentation off. What I've also put in there is a link into an article that I've just published on LinkedIn about the progressive nature of cancer. So if you haven't managed to get that link, you might find it under the materials tab in the menu. But if you haven't been able to get that link, let me know and I can always forward it on to you. Very interesting article for you to read, I think. So lots of people doing the webinars, NHS, cancer charities, pharmaceutical companies, and others. So I'm able, and you're able, to take advantage of this way of learning. It cuts down on geography, it cuts down on expense, but in the main, because I have access to all these groups of people, I'm able to tailor webinars, able to tailor courses to what you specifically want. And I can bring all this experience to bear as we go through as well. So enough of all the platitudes and sort of information about me. What I want to do is get straight into having a look at what is cancer. And as I said, if you've got any questions, feel free to type them in the chat box. Well, there's your answer. Cancer doesn't affect all ages in equal measure, really. By far and away, the vast majority of people coming through our door with cancer will be over the age of 60 years of age, with the vast majority of them being 70, 80 years of age. If we're born most after 1960, in the UK, probably 1 in 2 of us will get cancer in our lifetime. In the US, it's pretty much the same, maybe slightly less common in females. Why is that? And why is cancer becoming much more prevalent? Because it's a huge medical problem at the moment. Well, it's simply because we're living into that age bracket, really. Yes, there are other things. We know, and we're going to talk about some of those other things as well, but cancer is an older person's disease, really. And if we expect to live to be 70, 80, 90 years of age, then sort of we've got to expect that we're going to, most of us are going to develop cancer in some way, shape or form, really. It might be expected that my grandchildren, for example, if and when they arrive, that there's an expectation that they would live to be 100, and that wouldn't be unusual. So these graphs are going to have to change. At the moment they go from 85 and over. We might even need an 85 to 95, then a 95 and over in another 20 years time, because more and more of us are living into that age bracket. So we ain't going to really cure our way out of this situation. I'll come back to this slide in a minute, but let me just highlight this one here. The World Health Organization is suggesting that the number of people coming through our door with cancer will rise from 40 million to over 20 million in the next 20 years, really. Now, the UK, US, Europe, we're going to get our fair share of those new cancer cases, but the places in the world that are going to really feel the brunt will be places like Asia and Africa, China in particular, with massive populations expected to live into these age brackets. So I'm guessing the point is it's going to be very difficult to cure our way out of this situation unless somebody comes up with a miracle cure that will sort it out. Because the confounding fact, of course, is that cancer is not just one disease. There are many different types of cancer, over 200 different types, and we say that because they're related to the cells, different types of cells and tissues that we have in the body. We have roughly 200 different types of tissues in the body. So we need to start thinking about, and if you sort of follow the workers of Cancer Research UK over the last 20 years, they've gone from they're still trying to find a cure for the cancer, but they spend an awful lot of effort and time now educating people of how to prevent or lessen their risk of getting cancer throughout their lifetime. So what we've, I guess, really got to focus on, if we want to make some impacts into those figures, yes, still work on treatment and cures and things like this, but really we need to educate ourselves much better in order to lessen our risk of getting cancer in those later years. And the simple fact is that if we're coming in the 7th, 8th, 9th decade of life through the door with cancer, and that's when it's likely to happen, we really need to start those good habits in our formative years, really, and that education needs to start really quite young, so that people have the good habits of maybe good lifestyle and other things, which will hopefully reduce their risk of getting cancer later on in their years, really. Okay, and we'll talk more about that risk in a little while, because cancer's a progressive thing. You might pick it up on Wednesday, but you've probably had the starting of that disease for sometimes many years. Okay, it's not, you don't smoke a cigarette on Monday and you've got the lung cancer on Wednesday. It doesn't work like that. You start smoking when you're 14 and the lung cancer occurs when you're 47. That's the progressive nature of the disease. It happens over a long period of time. Okay, so no, it's not one disease. There are many different types of cancers, some that we do better with than others, but it does have certain common elements, if you like, which define it as a disease. One of those being that it manifests itself as a neoplasm. And by neoplasm, I mean new growth. New plasm growth, new growth. And this results from what we call uncontrolled proliferation of normal body cells. Now, let's dissect what we've just said there. Proliferation means we produce many cells, but that can be normal in the body. For example, if I cut myself here, I basically get a gap between the two edges of the skin, so I have to proliferate more cells in order to bridge that gap. But once that gap has been bridged, the proliferation stops, so it is controlled. Here, it's uncontrolled. So the cells continue to grow, and produce more cells. And we'll talk a little bit about how and why that does that later on in this presentation. This is referring to something that you may have heard of, the hallmarks of cancer. And we'll say a little bit more about that in a little while. And the other thing about that statement is it starts off, these normal body cells, they start off as your cells. So your body's not always quick to recognize these as a problem. It's far easier if you get attacked from outside by a virus or a bacteria or something like this. Your body recognizes those as foreign and sets up a reaction against them. These are your cells. So your body's not always quick to recognize them as a problem, really. We know cancer is very good at evading your own immune system. And we're not going to go into the ins and outs of that, but there are therapies that we're trying to develop. You might have heard of these immunotherapy drugs, which are trying to switch on the immune system to fight the cancer. Well, in effect, what they're doing is decloaking the cancer cells so they can, the normal immune system can see them. Because up until then, they haven't seen them. This uncontrolled proliferation, this switch on, this uncontrolled growth and replication of the cells is usually caused through some form of mutation within the genes of the cell itself. Now that mutation is caused by something. When we talk about genes, we talk about them giving us the colour of our skin, the colour of our eyes, colour of our hair, these sorts of things. That's true. But in the actual cells of the body, we have genes which tell the cell to do something, to divide, to grow, to stop, these sorts of things. And we're in particular interested in the genes which are switching the cell on to growth and replication. Because if these are damaged, then these cells can be switched on to permanent growth and replication, leading to this uncontrolled proliferation where you get a production of too many cells, which will form a group of cells which we call a neoplasm. But what causes this mutation? This genetic instability which results from that mutation, and lots of different mutations. Well, there's three ways, three sort of broad categories into which we could put this damage, if you like. Okay, so DNA is constantly being damaged through the stuff that we do, either to ourselves or is being done to us, but also maybe just purely and simply through bad luck, really. Each time each time a cell divides and replicates, it has to replicate the DNA. And DNA is massively long and it's massively complex, and I suppose it's a little bit like if I gave you the Harry Potter books, all 6 or 7 books, however many there are, and your job is quite simple. You have to copy these words out from this Harry Potter book. You copy them out, all the books, you keep copying today, tomorrow, and you do it for the next month. That's all you're doing, copying these words out. Just doing that simple process of copying these words, you will make mistakes. You'll miss words out. You may even spell a word wrong, these sorts of things. Well, these mistakes happen in the DNA every time the cell replicates, really. Now, more often than not, these mistakes that happen are repaired. There's lots of repair enzymes and mechanisms within the cell because it knows that this can happen, so it repairs that damage. Or sometimes the damage is done in a part of the DNA which is pretty much inconsequential. But sometimes you get that damage in parts of the DNA which is important to you. Yeah. There's no rhyme or reason really why people get brain cancers, really. They just do, and it's probably a result of just some aberrant mistake that's happened as these cells have been replicating, really. Then there's the right side of the diagram, carcinogens. There's some carcinogens. If you fancy, you can type in the box, see if you can think of any other carcinogens other than what's in there. There's one obvious one missing from there. Let's see if anybody can get it. Carcinogens carcinogens are potentially cancer-causing agents, and again, that can be subdivided into 2 categories, really. The first category is things that we don't really have an awful lot of control over. When you walk down the street, you're inhaling fumes from car exhaust and these sorts of things. If you're living in certain areas within, well, certainly the UK, I'll take that as an example, Cornwall area, these sorts of things, wherever you get granite rock, there's lots of radon gas comes up through the granite and volcanic rock. Now, we know these are carcinogens, but there's very little from a personal viewpoint that you can do anything with that. Good one, Claire. Viruses, yeah, I'll talk about viruses. We sort of expect our governments and legislation to help us with that. The other category are things perhaps that we do to ourselves that we sort of do have control over. And to a certain extent, viruses may come into this, but I'll just park viruses for the time being because they sort of almost make a third category. So things that we can do to ourselves. UV radiation. Where do we get UV radiation? Type it in. Do we know where we get UV radiation? Yes, Claire? Anywhere else? Where else do we get UV radiation? Sunbeds. Yeah, sunbeds, tanning lounges. And lots of people are using these, young people are using sunbeds nowadays. And it's really quite a problem because the power of modern day sunbeds is, well, they're very powerful. That the quality of the UV radiation is much greater than what we experience from the sun here when we go outside. So we expose our bodies, and normally when people go on a sunbed, I think that we take all our clothes off. So we expose parts of our body to these high levels of UV radiation that aren't used to it. And I don't know anybody who goes on sunbeds and puts sunblock on. So we expose levels, asking to high levels of UV radiation unprotected. And the rates of malignant melanoma across Europe and the UK are just increasing almost exponentially. And we've got to really nip it in the bud soon. And part of that is exposing ourselves to sunbeds. but also then exposing ourselves to UV radiation when we go on holiday or when we see a bit of sunshine and stuff like this. We'll be really, really careful. There's also there's one thing that's not on there, which I'm sure you've heard of: smoking. We know that smoking tobacco puts us at very high risk of getting certain types of cancers and moderate risk of getting other types of cancers. Certain chemicals like benzene that we see in petrol, the radiation that we use for X-rays and even for radiotherapy is in itself a carcinogen, ionizing radiation. All these things, some of them link into our lifestyle as well, particularly diet and things like this. We know there's a relationship between diet and bowel cancer and these sorts of things. By exposing ourselves to these sort of these carcinogens, we put ourselves at risk of getting cancer later on. So the more we expose, the greater the risk. But notice I'm saying risk. Doesn't necessarily say because we smoke we're going to get lung cancer, does it? Because we all know people who smoke. Do they all get lung cancer? No. But we know that people who get lung cancer tended to have smoked. That's the relationship. We all go out in the sun. Do we all get skin cancer? No. But we know that people who get skin cancer tended to have been out in the sun a lot or exposed to UV radiation. That's the relationship. There's very, very, very few cancers actually that we can actually say 100% is cause and effect. And the one that we cite the most is mesothelioma, which is a cancer of the pleura mainly. The pleura is that membrane which coats the lung. Mesothelioma is caused by something. Do we know what that is? Type it in if you know what that is. What's mesothelioma caused by? I'm using that word caused now. Yeah, brilliant. Brilliant, Craig. Asbestos. Brilliant, Claire. Yeah, asbestos. There's 3 types of asbestos. There's brown, there's blue, and there's white. It's the blue asbestos which is particularly nasty in this case. Now we know that people who come through our door with mesothelioma have been exposed to asbestos at some time during their life. But again, that exposure could have happened 30, 40 years previous, so it's very difficult to make that association sometimes. But we do know that that is cause and effect. Going back to smoking, you need to be aware, you may be already, but whereas UV radiation is one carcinogen, alcohol is one carcinogen, ionizing radiation, benzene. In one cigarette, there are over 30 carcinogens in one cigarette. So when we're smoking a cigarette, we're inhaling over 30 carcinogens. And don't forget the smoke coming off the end of the cigarette is other people are smoking 30 carcinogens as well that are around. So this is that whole issue around passive smoking, of course. And you know, it's estimated, if you look at the studies coming out of America, that up to 30% of lung cancers might be caused through passive smoking. Now that's a lot of people that are getting lung cancer through no fault of their own, unfortunately. Viruses, there are certain viruses that we know are implicated in certain types of cancer. Epstein-Barr virus raises its head in things like lymphoma and also certain head and neck cancers. Epstein-Barr virus is the same virus that gives you glandular fever. And the other one that's much more commonly related with cancer, of course, is the human papilloma virus, or the HPV. Now, what's interesting about the human papilloma virus is it's very much associated with cervical cancer, but we're actually seeing it cropping up in other parts of the body. Oral cavity cancer, head and neck cancer in general, anal cancer, these sorts of things. So our sexual habits are maybe predetermining other types of cancers being, or other parts of the body being exposed to the human papilloma virus, which is probably the reason why we're seeing it in a lot of these places as well. Not just that, because the HPV can also be carried through just intimate sexual contact as well, not necessarily penetrative sex and things like this. But it's interesting that we are seeing that same virus cropping up in other cancers as well. The third one on the slide here is the inherited mutations, and again, there's not an awful lot we can do about that. This is damage that we inherit. That is we just inherit. You'd have heard of the BRCA gene and the APC gene for colon cancer, and people who, if we are born with these or we have these within ourselves, then we are predisposed to getting certain types of cancers. So all in all, you know, some cancers we just happen. Other ones we've got a bit of control over, reducing our risk. The inherited mutations, you sort of, if we have that, then the decision-making process comes after we find out that we've got them, really, with whatever we need to do with that. But when you add all this up, that's probably the reason why cancer gets more common as we get older, because we don't just do one bit of damage. We do, by doing these things over a lifetime, we do incremental damage, random damage over a lifetime, which is in a sense me trying to knock a house down with a toffee hammer. And you might think, well, that you'd never knock a house down with a toffee hammer. Well, if I went round that house with my toffee hammer, just knocking the mortar between the bricks, and if I did that for 50 years, that's all I did, day in, day out, little bits here, chipping away, I'd knock that brick out, and then I'd knock that brick out, and then I'd knock that brick out, and eventually I'd do so much damage that that house would definitely fall down. And that's exactly what we're doing to our DNA by the things that happen, as we've been discussing on this slide. Little bits of knocking away, little bits of damage over a lifetime. So it's when we get to this age, 50, 60, 70 years of age, where we've accrued so much damage that we tip over into a cell which has this uncontrolled proliferation, really. That's what's happening. Okay? So, this genetic instability gives rise to what we call the hallmarks of cancer. And there are 6 initial ones, which are on this sort of schematic here, put together by Hanahan and Weiberg in the year 2000. Now, that is not that long ago. They since put another couple of traits in 2011 to make the total number of hallmarks 8. Those other 2 were evading the immune system, sort of mentioned, but the other one was this the sort of aberrant metabolism. The cell doesn't use glucose and oxygen in the way that normal cells do. They tend to use it in a different way and stuff. I'm just going to talk you very briefly through these 6 sort of standard hallmarks of cancer, if you like, so that you can get an idea of the types of things that are being talked about, and you might have heard reference to some of them as well. So the first one is the green one here. They sustain their own proliferative signaling. That's a posh way of basically they promote their own cell growth and multiplication. What do I mean by that? Well, cancer cells are surrounded by other cancer cells, as well as other cells, actually. But let's just stick to the cancer cells. But what happens is that cells are constantly communicating with each other. And the way that they communicate with each other is by secreting what we call growth factors. These growth factors are sort of little chemicals. The idea being is that they latch on to the cells around them, and they tell these cells around them to grow or to not grow, these sorts of things. So what we know about cancer cells is that they secrete vast amounts of these growth factors. And all these growth factors are latching on to other cancer cells around them, telling them to continue to grow. What we also know, that the messaging system in cancer cells, the messaging system which is telling the cell to grow and divide, is usually permanently switched on. So this cell is always getting the message and impetus to divide, grow, divide, grow, divide, grow, divide, grow. And it's self-perpetuating, because the more that these cells grow, the more that they secrete more growth factors, which switch on more cancer cells, which in turn secrete more growth factors, which latch onto more cancer cells, which in turn secrete more growth factors, which latch onto more cancer cells. So the whole thing is self-perpetuating. These cancer cells are just telling each other to continue to grow and continue to divide. Now, we know that. What these hallmarks are doing, allowing us to do, is to tailor-make, to make drugs which interact with these hallmarks and hopefully stop them doing what they are doing. So we have drugs which stop this signaling pathway, this message. So have you heard of drugs like cetuximab? You can give me a yes or a no here. Cetuximab, imatinib, sunitinib, trastuzumab, that's Herceptin, Avastin, bevacizumab. Anything with a mab at the end and anything with an inib at the end. Have you heard drugs like this? Because if you have, then these are these drugs. Yeah, these are these drugs which are trying to interact with this messaging network to stop it from happening. That's what they're designed to do. Couple this then with the grey one, the fact that these cells are continuing to grow, the messages grow, 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 divide, 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 and they also resist their own cell death. Now, cells, when they want to replicate, they go through a cycle, a cell cycle. It's a cycle of preparation. And the cells check themselves all the way around to make sure that everything's absolutely perfect before they divide. If they're not perfect, they kill themselves. It's cell death, apoptosis, programmed cell death. These little genes, little enzymes within the cell, P53, P10, the RB gene, all very important in searching the cell to make sure that everything's okay. If it's not okay, these are the genes, we call them tumor suppressor genes, which either do repair or tell the cell to kill itself. That's your normal body's, your normal body's normal process to stop abnormal cells from dividing. What we know in cancer cells is that these tumor suppressor genes aren't working. So we don't pick up on that damage in tumor cells, and we allow them to continue to grow. They don't die when they should do. What we also know is that tumor cells are very good at, or tumors are very good at growing their own blood supply, angiogenesis, inducing angiogenesis. And this is brilliant. They send out messages to the normal body to send me a blood supply. That's how it gets its oxygen. They use a chemical called VEGF. I don't know if you've heard of VEGF, vascular endothelial growth factor. There's several growth factors that influence blood vessel formation, but that's a critical one. So drugs like Avastin are designed to stop blood vessel formation in the tumour. So we know that. The blue one, we know tumour cells, normal cells in the body have only so many replications before they get a bit worn out, and your body wants to get rid of that and then start again with a new one. Tumour cells don't get worn out. This replication of cells that carries on, they're immortal. They never really tire of dividing and growing. They just carry on. So when all these follow, we've got growth signaling factors telling grow. They're not dying when they should do. They're getting blood vessels, so they're growing even more, and they're just carrying on dividing forever. This is not normal, and all these, when you add them up, allow abnormal cells to continue to grow. The brown one there, evading growth suppressors, what that basically means is, if we have a situation in the body where all these cells have been produced, they fill up that space. And basically, when they start crowding together, each of these cells should get a signal to, look, there's no more space, stop growing. Tumour cells don't get this, what we call it, contact inhibition. Just because they touch the cells around them, they don't stop growing. They're just bad. They don't get that message to stop. They're the drunk at a party, yeah? Usually a bloke, he bumps into people all night long and he never gets the message to stop. You know, there's not enough space. So when you add all this up, cells just continue to grow and they bunch on top of each other to form that clump of cells that we call a neoplasm. Now, as these cells continue to replicate, each generation of cell is slightly more mutated than the previous generation. So it gets worse as this cancer evolves. And what will happen is that these cancer cells will develop characteristics which allow them to invade and perhaps metastasize to other parts of the body. Metastasis is the crux of the matter, isn't it? That is what defines cancer as a disease. The very fact that it's able to start in one place, then go somewhere else and continue to grow. That's special. That's special. If the cancer stayed in the breast, we can deal with that. We'd operate on the breast, but that person would be cured. If that cancer stayed in the bowel, we can deal with that. We'd operate on the bowel, but that person would be cured. It's the very fact that that cancer is able to move from that place to somewhere else and continue to grow that causes us the problem. And if our patients are going to succumb to this disease, and a proportion of them will die of it, unfortunately, they don't die of the primary, they tend to die of the secondary. So our treatment strategy is relatively straightforward if you think about it. We either get to these diseases before they spread, which is what we spend an awful lot of time and resources doing, or we have to have a therapy available to us even though they've spread. We haven't got many of those. Okay? So understanding these hallmarks of cancer is allowing us to hopefully develop more drugs which can interact with the cancer cell on a much more personal level, if I can call it that, on a cellular level. And that's what makes these drugs different. Cetuximab, trastuzumab, bevacizumab, imatinib, rituximab, sunitinib, sorafenib. These are the drugs which are targeting these things round here, which will hopefully then, particularly that messaging system, the receptors. Has anybody heard of EGFR? Have you heard of EGFR? Give me a yes or a no if you've heard of EGFR. Yeah. That stands for epidermal growth factor receptor. Yeah. Often mutated or overexpressed in things like head and neck cancers, colon cancer, lung cancer. Now that we know that, we know that that receptor is the thing that's programming these cancer cells. We target it with drugs like cetuximab or gefitinib or ilotinib, these sorts of drugs. Yeah. Another receptor. Have you heard of HER2? Anybody heard of HER2? You may yes or no if you've heard of HER2. And where have you heard of HER2? What type of cancer? breast cancer in particular, yeah. But what is interesting, we're also seeing HER2 positivity in things like stomach cancer and esophageal cancer as well. The drug that we use to target HER2, of course, is Herceptin. Trastuzumab is the chemical word for it. So, you know, our knowledge of this is then allowing us to tailor make those treatments, those drugs to those. So that's the really good thing. And they're important, those drugs, because the treatments that we have available to us at the moment, surgery, chemotherapy and radiotherapy, are very, very good, but they cause a lot of damage. Surgery aside, that causes damage anyway because you're cutting things out. But chemotherapy and radiotherapy also cause a lot of damage. That's really because they don't take into account those hallmarks. Those hallmarks are trying to establish the difference. What is the real difference between a cancer cell and a normal cell? Chemotherapy and radiotherapy doesn't really work on that difference at that level. It sort of manufactures a difference. We manufacture a difference because we fractionate, or we produce cycles of chemotherapy, or fractions of radiotherapy, or we spray the radiation at different angles, or we give different drugs which affect different parts of the cell cycle. We manufacture a difference. And the problem with that is, with those therapies, is they produce an awful lot of side effects because they also kill a lot of healthy cells. These targeted therapies here, a bit of an adjunct, an add-on to chemotherapy, that ellipse will get bigger as we generate more and more of those therapies like Herceptin and stuff. We don't use them by themselves, however. We use them sort of usually alongside another set of chemotherapy drugs as well. But they pay real attention to the difference between cancer cells and normal cells, and that's why they're important. They're not as targeted as what we would like them to, and that's a bit of a misnomer, and you need to be aware that the EGFR, HER2, these receptors that we were talking about, they're also on normal cells, and EGFR is on a lot of cells, particularly in the intestines and on the skin. So when we give drugs like cetuximab, two of the major side effects are things like diarrhea and acne, skin rash, these sorts of things, because we also affect the EGFR on normal cells as well. So they're not without the problems, but the reactions and the side effects are far less usually than what we see with things like traditional chemotherapy. And all those things scattered around are all the things which influence, of course, what types of treatments, what you do really. I'm not going to go into any detail. What I do are webinars on all of this and fill in all the gaps that we've covered, that we haven't covered today in the short time that we've got together. So what I'll do is I'll just switch over to this one, because you'll find this on my website, and these are the webinars that I do that you may or may not be interested in. So you can click on these, for example, Cancer Not So Basics, more about metastasis, more about staging and grading, more about cancer cells and relating to the different types of tissues. Let's just go back. If you're interested in cancer treatments, look, radiotherapy explained, chemotherapy, targeted therapies, immunotherapy, these new drugs that are coming on, so you can have a look at those. If you want to look at leukemias, lymphomas, we've got webinars for that as well, so they're of interest to you, myeloma as well. So pretty much everything really that you need to supplement your education, tumour specific, lung cancer, breast cancer, gynae cancers, prostate cancers. So they're all on my website. So I would suggest you maybe go have a look at those and see if any of these take your fancy really, because they're a really good way of getting up to date with your cancer education, really. So that's all I want to say in terms of what's going on in terms of cancer. It is a progressive thing. It doesn't just happen. It's something that's sort of been happening for years. And it's this genetic instability that is then passed on to future generations of cancer cells, which get them the bit worse, actually. And as they get worse, they start to develop characteristics which are going to allow them to spread and metastasize and things like this. And certainly realizing those hallmarks of cancers and allowing us to hopefully generate a new batch of drugs and strategies which are going to allow us to take cancer treatments to the next level, really. Okay. So I'll just, have you got any questions? If you have, type them in now, and whilst you're typing them in, I'll just carry on with the rest of the presentation and then come back and answer your questions without a doubt. What I will do maybe is just give you one more question, if I may, and let's see what you think of that. It's a very easy question. I'm glad that's the answer. Good, good. I'm glad. I'm glad that's the answer. I'm a lover of webinars because they're just convenient, really. We don't have to travel. I don't know where you are. Be interested to know where you are. Are you at home? Are you still in the office? Or are you on the go? Or I don't know, are you watching EastEnders and on the other telly as well whilst you're listening to this? Or it'd be interesting because that's the beauty of them. You can do them anywhere, and they're only an hour. I think the sort of leukemia webinars are at lymphoma an hour and a half, an hour and a quarter, that sort of thing, because there's a lot of stuff to cover. But generally speaking, they're just an hour which you can fit into to any workload, really. But this is the deal that's on offer now until the 1st of March, and as soon as the 1st of March, then it's going off. So if you've got colleagues that you feel could benefit from webinars, these are a great way of bulk buying webinars and saving a lot of money, actually, up to 40% if you've got a lot. So each of these are individual logins, or you can log in for a group. And by a group, I mean, and a lot of places do this, they put me on big screen and they've got 20 people around the table. Just for £125 for one of those, that's 20 people. 125 divided by 20 people, that's I can't even work it out. What's that? 50p each or something like this, or £5 or something like that, to get what is really good level of interactive, fun cancer education, really. Suitable for all levels as well. If you're interested in getting that offer, just email me, we can talk about how we can do it. If you're interested in just doing individual webinars, then get through my website and just book on. Okay. So Craig, let me just look at that. What are your thoughts about the effect of cannabis on cancer cells? We are continuously seeing more and more people talking about this. Yeah. Cannabis, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Because I was having this conversation just either yesterday or the day before, I can't remember, with somebody who was swearing blind that cannabis oil is the next miracle cure for cancer. There's a lot, I don't know enough about it, I suppose, is the easy answer. What I do know is that smoking cannabis increases your risk of getting things like lung cancer. Now, whether that's I guess what we need to try to do is isolate what it is in the cannabis which is giving us the health benefit, and use that and get rid of all the other stuff within the cannabis leaf that's maybe not doing us so much good. So I don't know about it, but I do know that some people swear blind by it. But I guess I'm falling into the group that's suggesting that really we don't know enough about it at the moment, and the odd case here and there of benefit is far outweighed by a lot of people who maybe take and do harm to themselves. That's probably where I fit at the moment, but that's maybe just because of my own ignorance and I don't know enough about it. So I can't be of any more help than that, really. Claire, if doing a group, are you available during the day? Most of these webinars I do during the day. I've done this one on an evening because I was trying to promote them to a US audience, United States. So I did it at a time which would be convenient to them. I did this webinar last week during the day. We had 50 attendees registered then, and it's capped at 50, so you might not have been able to get on. But all my webinars are during the day, and if you go through the links on my website, you'll see the times that they are. Various times, usually either in the morning or in the afternoon, early morning or early afternoon. What I also do is bespoke groups of webinars. So if you said we want to do these webinars, but we've got a group that can only make it on this day, then we can schedule webinars for when it's convenient to you. It's as simple as that. That's how it works. That's the beauty of this. That is the beauty of this. It's highly flexible. Yeah. And there's no travelling involved. Are any of you at home? Are you all at home doing this? That would be interesting. If you're all at home, that's amazing. Yeah. How cool is that? That's just really cool. You're in bed. That's even better. Cool. Yeah, that's brilliant. That's the beauty of it, isn't it? Sit up in bed, headphones on. Fantastic. Fantastic. It would be lovely to see you on some of the other webinars, and I can guarantee you would thoroughly enjoy them, and it would be brilliant to have you on board. And just because you've stayed with me, I'm going to give you another bit of information now. I don't know whether you know this, but you might have heard that term carcinoma, and we think it's an interchangeable term for a cancer, but it isn't. Now, if you come on the Cells, Tissues and Cancer webinar, you get more in depth on this, but every carcinoma is a cancer, but not every cancer is a carcinoma. And that is because carcinoma tells us more information. It actually tells us that we're dealing with cancer which is involving a type of tissue called epithelial tissue. There are other types of tissues in the body, like muscle, like bone. We call these collectively connective tissues. We call them sarcomas. Yeah. So carcinoma isn't a catch-all term for cancer in general. It's a much more specific term, and it's only one section of cancers. So don't just use it as an interchangeable term for cancer, because it isn't. Cells, Tissues and Cancer webinar, you can find out more about that. I'm not. Corey's on at the same time. Yeah, it's my glasses. I thought he said come on at the same time. Then yeah, okay. I'll try and do it without clashing with Coronation Street or something like that. There you go. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you found it stimulating, enjoyable, and hopefully fun. I hope you've learned a little bit as well, and hope it inspires you to maybe go on and do some further learning. And obviously, I'd love you to book on some of the webinars as well, and certainly pass it around your colleagues. And I'll get a recording of this to you in the next day or two, and feel free to share that with your colleagues as well. So let's get Twitter going and Facebook going wild, and only remains to say thanks for joining me. Enjoy the rest of your evening, and hopefully I'll see you some other time on another webinar. It's a shame that other people that had registered couldn't join us tonight, because I think they've missed quite a good session. So you take care of yourselves, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye. Thank you, Claire. Thank you, Craig. Thank you, Sarah.